Coming up on this week's Redcast.
Understanding of the financial stability of Britain is not possible without understanding what's going on in the world at the same time. Current paradigm of reporting, you do business, then you create data that represent that business, you deliver them to an institution, the institution takes the data from millions of agents out there within their constituency though, and builds statistics. That is doomed to failure because there are so many steps, it will never be real time. Measurement is about being in control. If you want to be in control, you need to act at the speed and scale of the events that come your way. What is the substance we measure? And in a global context, the solution I came to was to say, okay, we need to change the way we see the world. We need to change paradigm, the story we talk about the world. In that I say, well, the technical substance of the economy is a network of contracts. So it's contracts. Any economic relationship is the result of, is embodied in a contract, and every contract is an economic relationship. So see the economy as a network of contracts among global population of parties. Contracting parties don't care whether they're in this or that country, that goes across borders. And all of a sudden you have the vision of a system that's a graph of contracts. We have many good building blocks coming along. So ACTUS, Common Domain Model are two of them. And again, I'm hopeful because the renewal cycles of technologies are accelerating. But on the other hand, I'm also a little bit concerned because it really, being successful really requires us to work together on certain things. So we need to get the technical frame aligned with the demands or technical demands of the system.
Welcome to Redcast.
Where we shine a light on banking digitization.
Hello and welcome to Redcast. I'm PJ DiGianmarino, CEO of JWG. I am really pleased to have a special guest with us here today. His name is Francis Gross, and he works at the ECB, though he's not speaking in that capacity. We've had Francis on in a whole number of events over the years, and I've had the pleasure of working with him in and around Frankfurt and a whole bunch of standards efforts, including the introduction of the LEI over a decade ago. Francis was key and instrumental to beginning to change the way we look at reference data within the industry. But today we're doing a bit of a warm-up exercise and a teaser for what Francis is going to be speaking about at our annual conference in November. So he's got a keynote address and has a big theory he's bringing to the table. So what we're trying to do here is break it down a little bit, get some of the key concepts out there, and begin to get some interest in how we think about regulatory reporting. So without further ado, Francis, you've had a fantastic career, but one of the things I appreciate about it is you're very much an outsider, and you come from outside the industry, but also in a very process-centric industry in the automotive area. I also have a background in process industries and can appreciate a bit the outsider perspective, which I think is why we've always had good conversations in this space. But most of the people in financial services haven't. They're very, very much looking at the world as a series of messages and how they trade things. Your thinking has spilt over into a much more digital vision, and there are some bigger concerns that you're taking on. What's the big measurement problem that you're concerned about most?
Yeah, well, when we talk about measurement, I would think we should start to look at what we measure and what we measure it for. We measure the economy and finance in order to stay in control of the system. Everyone measures. Institutions like the ECB measure, produce statistics and other measurement to understand the system as a whole. Any bank out there, any company out there measures its own doings and its environment for the best they can. So we measure for a purpose. Then how we measure depends on how we see the system. What is it we are measuring? What is our concept of it? And when I look at the way statistics was done, when I arrived 2006 in statistics at the ECB, I was a bit taken aback because, well, statistics is slow. Statistics is rigid. It is dependent on legislation that changes very slowly, much more slowly than the world. And at the time when I arrived, all that was colliding big time with the digital developments we could see in the world. So we have actually allowed the system to change in its very substance, shifting things from people doing to computers doing, shifting things from people doing things locally to computers doing them connected globally. So we have now a system that is, or we already had 2008, a system that was tightly coupled on a global scale. And although I was feeling very uneasy with that when I came in 2006, the worries became real when Lehman went down. Already at that time, I had developed the concept of what is now the LEI system, because you need to start somewhere. All this might sound a bit strange to people in finance who are dealing with solving their problems on a day-to-day basis, but I looked at the whole system like an engineer from the start. So that put me a little bit aside the crowd, largely made of economists at the ECB and lawyers and people of that kind. And I tended to see the system as one global system, as I had learned it in the automotive sector, where I contributed to the first wave of globalization in the automotive industry and the emergence of global supply chains. And I've always tended, as a personal inclination, to look at the entire relevant system. When I can't find a solution inside the small system, I need to look for a bigger one. And meanwhile, already 15 years ago, the smallest relevant system for, say, financial stability is the world, and the smallest relevant system for a large bank is the world as well. Any bank sitting in Frankfurt or London felt the impact of Lehman very quickly, and they didn't know how they would receive the impact and whether.
That's really fundamental, right? Because the control framework for London and the control framework for New York and Frankfurt were all really separate. I mean, the data was collected differently in different languages, and the requirements were even described in different ways. What is this new interconnected system, as you describe it, mean about the language we use to talk about finance?
I think here we need to separate on the one side the international dialogue and the local practice. There has always been an international dialogue among institutions and governments. You have always had international institutions like the IMF, for instance, who look at the entire system. But the practice of, for instance, data collection for statistics and supervisory statistics, which is also statistics, that has always been local, strictly local. And the various national institutions have a tradition of looking at their own banks, or the local chunks of their own banks and the local chunks of foreign banks, which is inherited from the past where everything was local. And so the evolution in technology, or the revolutions, ongoing revolution in technology, have created global institutions, have created global networks of transactions and contracts, and the institutional setup hasn't followed at the same pace. So now we have international discussions, the FSB, for instance, on things such as BCBS 239, but all of that comes on the back of accumulated legacy at the local level. It comes also within a culture of thinking local, which has been bred over decades by the very nature of our institutions, which are anchored in the, say, political geography. You know, the Banque de France is a French central bank working on the French legislation. Now it is changing, it has been changing for over 20 years now with the ECB coming in, but it still remains a local institution. And if you look beyond the EU, you don't even have that uniting, say, bracket like now in the euro area, the ECB.
In Europe, there's a very cohesive governance framework, and there are many different institutions that all have to align, and there's treaties that bind people to alignment. But you just brought up an example of how there's a local framework that has a challenge integrating, and we've seen with the recent move from the EBA to consult on a need for an integrated framework, even that is difficult. So, two questions. One is, for Europe, what's so hard about integration of the monitoring? And then secondly, what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Okay, so within Europe, we have two kinds of obstacles. The one is the sheer technical difficulty of changing the legacy in every country that is a member of the EU. And the other is more at the human and political level, where we have a collision between, on the one hand, a global vision of the technical system, so basically the markets, and more national vision and local regional vision of one's role and responsibilities. Those are difficult to reconcile. And of course, at the global level, this is even more difficult to reconcile. I mean, within the EU, we have a common spirit, which guides our thinking, which guides our actions, although it guides them more at the level of principles, concepts, goals. A bit like at the global level, we have BCBS 239, which is a set of principles. But everyone will interpret them their own way, the way it fits their own circumstances.
Yeah, so those principles become too high level. They're hard to translate globally into anything that's meaningful to help actually with the system observation.
I would say it's the other way around. The only thing we can agree about globally in a very diverse world is high-level principles, and the evolution on the ground of the practical reality will then take time, and that's where is the crux at the moment. It's not that it's too expensive to move things. It is too expensive when we think small. We think about cost of new measurement, the kind of things I proposed. But if we saw that as investment, we would see, well, if we invested that money, and anyway, that all the landscape of systems we see today will be deeply obsolete in 20 years and will have been replaced by then. So if we replace those things now with concepts, designs that can work sustainably in the future, we would actually benefit, and the sacrifice wouldn't be very large. It would simply be an economic investment. But to do that, we need to start architecturally, systems architecture. And the architecture that matters is at the global level.
And so that without that global level, can we come up with the architecture, or do you see it as possible to evolve in pockets?
Well, I think that the conceptual design will only come up if we think the entire system. Practical progress will come in pockets. I mean, we need to find the courage to think basically in terms of conceptual revolution, and then to seek for implementation along evolutionary steps that will form a migration path to that brave new world. So basically, that thinking about a systemic vision will guide us in doing the practical things now that do, on the one side, satisfy the practical needs we have, and on the other side, are compatible. Absent that architectural concept, we will simply do what's best now, what we can afford, and realize in 5 years' time it has added to the problem and we need to throw it away. We won't find the courage for that, so we continue that way.
Yeah, amen to that. We're in the middle of two big efforts at the moment. One is the complete global rewrite of derivatives reporting to a new set of standards, and trying to work out how to implement those in very different languages and very different legal constructs. But we're able to use the common domain model to model language of finance and actually take some of the semantic technology and apply it, so that makes it a bit easier. but it's still revolutionary for a lot of the industry. But the other thing we're doing is stepping back together with you and looking at the whole discussion around the digital reporting overall, what could actually happen, as part of this new paradigm that you talk about. Could you give us just a taster about what is this network of contracts that you talk about?
Okay. Yeah. Well, here let's start from the base. What is the substance we measure? And in a global context, the solution I came to was to say, okay, we need to change the way we see the world. We need to change paradigm, the story we talk about the world. In that I say, well, the technical substance of the economy is a network of contracts. So it's contracts. Any economic relationship is the result of, is embodied in a contract, and every contract is an economic relationship. So see the economy as a network of contracts among global population of parties. Contracting parties don't care whether they're in this or that country, that goes across borders. And all of a sudden you have the vision of a system that's a graph of contracts. So what is a contract? A contract is very abstract, but it's an algorithm. It's a mathematical function that says who does what for whom, when, under what circumstances. So that can be a contract of the kind financial contract. I lend you money, you pay me back every month. It can be a commercial contract. You give me product, I give you money. It can be a service contract. I scratch your back, you give me $5. It can even be a barter contract. I advise you and you give me a car. Anything goes in that broad concept. There is already a prototype we might be talking about later or at the conference. It's called ACTUS, which has implemented that in terms of financial contracts. So how does that bring us to measurement? Well, it's very simple. Measurement is about being in control. If you want to be in control, you need to act at the speed and scale of the events that come your way and which you might like or not like. So that means in a financial system that is global and that works real time, and we've seen propagation of shocks can be global in instant, we need to measure at the scale and speed of the system, which means, and of the events, dangerous events, which is global real time. I mean, here I simply think like an engineer. You build a vehicle, a prototype, say, and the question will be, well, okay, does it go at the speed that we want it? Yes. Will it be able to brake and stop in due course before a crash happens? Yes. Or if not, we need to look at the brakes again. We need to look at the state of the road. We need to look at the kind of things that can happen in traffic. And when I see the financial system, things can happen, which today, our measurement, our whole measurement arsenal that's in place will not really help us to address in ways we should feel comfortable with.
So current paradigm of reporting and sending lots of information in and people complaining that it's bad and putting out fines and then repeating that cycle is doomed for failure. You're suggesting there's a new way to do this based on these contracts or algorithms around the contracts.
Yeah, I mean the network of algorithms and of contracts, and each contract being an algorithm, that's just the technical substance of the system. Now, when I look at the system with that image in mind, through the lens of that paradigm, then you break it down. And well, yes, the specification for effective measurement, it must be global real time. Then you deduct things from that. For instance, reporting. So the current paradigm of reporting, you do business, then you create data that represent that business, you deliver them to an institution. The institution takes the data from millions of agents out there within their constituency though, and builds statistics. That is doomed to failure because there are so many steps, it will never be real time. So the conclusion you come to at the end of the road is that in a world of automated contracts, smart contracts, automated operations, the very data that serves in the operational systems must serve at the same time for measurement.
So this is the key, right? So we can get rid of all this interpretation layer and people around the summary of the actual economy and we can tie an API directly to that algorithm to say, give me the data in this format. Not all the data. I mean, obviously, some of these contracts are commercially sensitive, but define the way to get the data from the contract to the regulator.
Yeah, that's exactly the consequence of that. And of course, that flies in the face of all we do today. But again, as an engineer, I say we need to have a coherent system. And on the one hand, we allow the use of technologies. I mean, many industries regulate the use of technologies. Even competitive sports such as Formula One, the use of technologies is very, very tightly regulated. Aircrafts and so on as well, and medicine foremost. In finance, we allow the use of technologies, trading algorithms and whatever, but we have allowed that on a local basis without thinking enough about the systemic impact those technologies have, and they change the fundamental behavior of the system. In that sense, for instance, that understanding of the financial stability of Britain is not possible without understanding what's going on in the world at the same time. So we will need to face that. And again, I'm hopeful because the renewal cycles of technologies are accelerating. But on the other hand, I'm also a little bit concerned because it really, being successful really requires us to work together on certain things. So we need to get the technical frame aligned with the demands of the technical demands of the system.
I'm gonna read you a quote from one of your favorite books. I'm gonna ask you how to help me understand how we're gonna answer Thomas Kuhn's important question here in his book on structure of scientific revolutions. He says, within the new paradigm, old terms, concepts, and experiments fall into new relationships with the other. And the inevitable result is what we must call, though the term is not quite right, a misunderstanding between the two competing schools. So my question to you is, what are the misunderstandings between what you're talking about in the future and what we're currently doing today?
Yeah, well, Thomas Kuhn also says that a new paradigm usually comes up. So a new way of looking at the world usually comes up either from young people who join a profession or from people who come in at a more mature age from the outside. And actually, I'm the latter case. It also, he also says that actually there is what he calls incommensurability. That's what you mentioned here. Yeah? Incommensurability between the two views of the world. You can't really migrate from one view of the world to the other. Once you have seen the world the other way, you're outside. You left that community. I mean, Thomas Kuhn is a fundamental book to read, Structure of Scientific Revolutions. I really recommend it. It's a bit tedious at times, but it really is enlightening. I reread it recently. So what he shows is that science, so he's a historian of science, but any other community of practice happens fundamentally in a social space. So there is a community that thinks that way, that sees the world that way. And to join that community, you have to see it that way. Sometimes accidents happen when, for instance, and that's what he mentions also in the book as drivers of revolutions.
But for this revolution here today, what are the misunderstandings, Francis? What are some of the misconceptions about the way we get the data today that are going to change into the new paradigm?
Well, I think most people, and it's exactly where we're going. Most people who work in the system today, be it on the private side or on the public side, are anchored in their view of the world. And they're caught in it through social practice, social bonds. And it's difficult to explain where the incommensurability lies. It's simply two different views of the world, which lead, for instance, people who think the way I think, and luckily I'm not alone anymore, to see goals that others who live in the previous paradigm see as wildly ambitious, out of this world, unfeasible. I'll give you a practical example. LEI, I say that the LEI data must be accurate in real time so that you can use the data and not think about whether it's accurate or not. So today the LEI is on an annual renewal cycle. So if you change your name 10 days after your renewal of the LEI, the data in the LEI system will be inaccurate until the next review. Now people tell me, oh, we can't accelerate that process because we have the process of renewal, validation, and so on. I say, no, do it the other way around. The moment you change your name, your new name will become your legal name exactly at the point in time when it is registered and when the business register has updated the news in the LEI system for all to see. So it's simply a different way of seeing things, but of course it goes against the habits of, for instance, the very diverse practices in business registers and courts and all these places where you have grace periods of 3 or 6 months and so on and so forth, which are habits that actually fly in the face of what is basic necessity in the digital age if we want to do it well.
So I think that's you hit on a great example of, it's just a tweak to the process, the way we do it today, in order to enable the digitized approach that you're talking about. I mean, it's not that is just it's not even like very sophisticated process re-engineering. It's just changing a couple of time parameters. But we also have, as you mentioned, ACTUS, and we also have the common domain model, and we have ways of looking at the actual representation of finance that are going on. And those are much more fundamental. Yeah. So we might not be as far away as people think is where I'm going with this.
We have many good building blocks coming along. So ACTUS, common domain model are 2 of them. But again, we need to fit those into a broad concept. And that's where actually we are weak. We tend to stay within our mandates. So one of the excuses I always hear also from leaders in the public sector when I talk about the need to make the LEI, for instance, a compulsory infrastructure, the most basic thing, you have a name, I have a name, it is public knowledge. So to make the coverage of the LEI global, universal, all countries, every entity in each country, and real time. They say, well, but it's not in our mandate. And I'm okay, there's no mandate for that. Why? Because all mandates have been written before the digital age by people who were trained long before the age of technology. So actually we have a fundamental obstacle here. And I think change will start with basically publishing and distributing that new paradigm, increasing the number of people who see the world that different way. Once you see the world, the economy as a network of contracts, you can't seriously work on local solutions anymore.
Well, that's a fantastic place, I think, to draw a line under this this conversation. There'll be so much at the conference that we'll be talking about that will help pull this all together. Last question for you. What's your big wish for next year in this conference? I mean, I think I've got a link to the show notes of presentation you gave in 2019. I know we've had a pandemic that slowed down conferences, but what do you really want to have happen next year?
Well, next year is coming very quickly, but my dearest wish would be that debate to move to the public stage at a high level so that the leaders become aware of these things. So for instance, having that conversation at Davos. And Davos has now moved to talking about climate change, which is important. I mean, yeah, it is important. But where climate change threatens us with a kind of, say, cancer, right? It's cancer of humanity. Well, digitalization not addressed, so sustainable digitalization not addressed, threatens us with a stroke. That could come out of the blue instantly and wreak havoc. And we have seen 2008, that was instant damage. But then from there, a lot of developments unfolded, which we can't like. And my personal bet is that we wouldn't have had Brexit, we might not have had Trump, we might not have had a lot of other, say, unsavory political developments like right-wing parties coming up and so on, if we had not had the 2008 crisis in the way it was handled. And it had to be handled the way it was handled because there was no good measurement in place.
So your wish is that we get this debate elevated and that we can have a proper discussion about how we might think of pushing it forward. And I share your enthusiasm to talk about the outside-in approach to solving some of these very thorny issues. And look forward to seeing you at the conference and talking to everybody at our digital reporting task force meeting, which we have another one today and then another one coming up next week before the conference. So stay tuned, everybody. And thank you all very much for tuning in. Fantastic to see we've just passed 4,500 listens to Regcast. Please spread the word. Like us or just give us some feedback, or always hit us at jwg-it.eu. Looking forward to talking to you all again soon.
You can go to our conference website, which is regtechconference.co.uk, or go to the JWG website, which is jwg-it.eu. This is Regcast,
where we shine a light on banking digitization.